Boas, welcome to the new episode of Facing Declining Variations. In this third episode, we will look at the Scandinavian defense. I can't say that this is not one of my most preferred openings, but after many requests on the comments of our previous videos, well, I just had to do a video on it. So, starting with it, we'll play as black, and as you all know, the Scandinavian defense comes after e4, where you play d5. Well, the, the most correct way of facing this, as in almost all gambits, is accepting it. In this case, you just take the pawn as white. But as in this video, we are looking at the declining variations. So we will look all the other moves that do not involve capturing the pawn. And we can have a taste of what they may be just looking at the database from lead chess. For example, we can face the d4, the so-called Blackmar-Diemer Gambit. We can face knight f3, the Tennison Gambit, and we can face other moves that do not have a name, such as d4 or knight c3, or even all the other moves, such as queen f3, bishop d3, well, tons of others. We have all these moves, but as in other videos, I'm gonna split them into several groups so it's easier to understand and separate between them. In this case, and moving on to a Lichess study, I decided to split them into e5, the advanced, let's say, variation, the Tennison, the Blackmar-Diemer knight c3, despite not having its name, it still leads to a particular structure that you normally don't face in the Scandinavian. And lastly, I just reserve all the other moves, which are just like garbage moves or moves that it doesn't occur to you. Well, I put them all in this section. So first, in the first group, we're going to look at the move e5. I can tell you from experience that I used to play this when I started playing chess, as I wasn't like all other guys, and I didn't like taking the pawn, and I played this. However, I soon realized that this was not the correct way of approaching the Scandinavian, as if I tried to get the center with d4, moves like c5, undermining the center, or f6 even, would come rapidly, and I will always get a losing position. So, if you are faced with e5, just play c5, trying to stop the d4 push, so that you control the center, and next, you don't block the knight, and you can put the knight behind the pawn. For example, in this section, I picked 4 moves that you might face. For example, if they play f4, you then just play knight c3, as usual. If they play knight f3 behind, you play bishop g4. If they play bishop e2, you play e6. For example, this is a common position that you might arise, but in this uh, type of opening, you always get like a improved Caro-Kann where you have much more space than you normally have in a Caro-Kann, but you have all the breaks that you have, such as f6 and f that type of structure that you normally put a knight on f5. If they play h6, you take and then play h5 so that you cement the knight, and that's normally the gameplay. So, and you can see by the eval, for example, in this, if I just some moves as the most played moves on Lichess, you can see that after 9 moves, black has a much more comfortable position. For example, in the other moves, you can also be faced with, in this case, you can also be faced with c3. c3 trying to play d4. In this particular order, I don't advise you to play d4, despite being possible. I advise you to just play knight c6. And if they do play d4, well, in this case, you just play bishop f5. If they take, you take here, and you just build similar to the Caro-Kann with d6, even knight h6. Try to get the bishop, and you have a very comfortable position. Finally, you can also be faced with the move d4, but here is like just a reverse Scandinavian. You just take, and for example, if they do take with the queen, you just attack the queen with knight. If they move, you play bishop f1, e6. You have a very pleasant position. The second group we're gonna see is the move knight f3, the so-called Tennison Gambit, where if you started playing, you've probably seen lots of videos about these beginner traps, and they all include Tennison. So Tennison is after the Scandinavian, they play knight f3, and if you take, normally they play knight g5, and this has a very common trap, is that if you play knight f6, which is not yet a mistake, and they play d3, and you take with the bishop. A really common mistake, as you can see by the database, is play h6, because if they do, just met with knight takes f7, forking your queen and queen, your rook and queen, and which forces you to take, and if you do, then bishop g6 just wins your queen, because there's nowhere for your king to go and defend your queen. So in this case, for example, in this position, if you reach this position, you can just play e6. In this case, if he takes and they plays here, you just have king e7 and defend the queen. On the other hand, if they play knight the Tennison, I advise you in this position just to play 5, because because if you play here, as you can see by the engine, bishop c4 is still a move that forces you to play e3, and they have at least possibilities of attack. Knight c3 and regain the pawn back. But I advise you in this position just to play 5. Threaten the knight, force it to capture, and then play f5, just chase back the knight, and now you just have a great position. Much more space presence in the middle, and at the same time, for example, if they play bishop e5, you just play knight e7, defending your knight. On the other hand, in this case, you can also be faced with the move bishop c4, just preventing you from castling. But here you have the really powerful move, queen h4. If you play queen h4 attacking the bishop, you're probably forcing the move d3, and if you play d3, well, here you just play f4, attack the knight, and when the knight moves to e4, then bishop g4 just forces the queen to move due to the fact that f3 is impossible to the pin, and after queen e2, just knight d4, knight f6, castles. We have a really pleasant position. On the other hand, for example, if in this position they play bishop e3, also saving the bishop, well, f4 here is even stronger because after knight e4, bishop g4 just traps the queen in 8 moves. So this is what you need to know if you face the Tennison. So moving on to the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit, that is if they play d4. Well, in this position, if they play d4, after the Scandinavian, well, this is a very valid gambit, and there's a lot of videos and theory on this, but I'm just going to show you one variation, especially because if you play the Scandinavian, you're probably not, you don't want, you're not used to facing the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit. So in this case, I just advise you, for example, if they play knight c3, you just play knight f6 to defend the pawn. And the most common variation, as you can see by the Alicia's database, is play f3. But here you just take, and when they take with a knight, you're just my advice is for you to play g6, and you're a pawn up, so you have that going for you. And even if they play bishop c4, you just play bishop g7 and try to castle as soon as possible. As you can see, most of them play queen. This one already have a really pleasant advantage. For example, if they play queen e1, which is a common move in this type of opening, going from here, well, you just need to know that you can continue development after they go here. One thing you know is to put the bishop on g4, trade it for the knight, and after they attack your bishop or whatever, you just take. And when they take, one move is queen e7, try to go for queen g4, force the queen trade or move the queen back, but in this case the pawn gets soft, and don't remember you're just a pawn up. You can also be faced with the rider variation of the Blackmar-Diemer Gambit, which is after you take here, they don't take with the knight take with the queen, offering yet another pawn, but here you just take the pawn, and after they play bishop e3, well, I advise you to leave this check. If they block, well, you just play queen g4, offering an exchange of queens. For example, they might castle queenside, but here just take, and when they take c6, just controlling the knight, and you just can play bishop f5, e6, g6, bishop g7, you have 2 pawns. And for example, if they play g6, well, again, you play queen g4, threaten to take 3 queens. If they don't, well, you're just preventing them from castling queenside. As you can see, bishop d7 after knight c6 and castle queenside. You just have 2 pawns and with a much better position. On the fourth group, we have knight c3. Well, knight c3, I just included here because it's a move that creates a very particular structure that is not common when you're playing the Scandinavian. For example, if you play e4 and then d5, and they play knight c3, well, here I advise you to play d4. And when they play here, you can have 2 types of positions. You can play e5, which gives a small edge to black, but this normally runs into some sort of f4, trying to chip away that structure. And when you have these 2 pawns in the center, it's easily attacked like they do, for example, in the Caro-Kann. So if you don't like playing against these types of positions, which is my case, for example, get some sort of position like this. If you take and they already just have a pawn there, you can play for c5. You can just play also more quietly here and don't play e5 and just play g6. And if they play knight g3, you just play bishop g7, knight f6, castles, which are a more common way of approaching it. Finally, I've included all the other moves that are not these ones, and have also a lot of games played on niches. I decided to focus on for on six moves, despite others being there on it. For example, some people just like to get their queens out really early and play queen f3. Well, here obviously this is a very stupid move, but in most of these scenarios you just take the pawn, and when they take back, well, you just have a free temp on the queen, and you just kick it out. It's some sort of reverse Scandinavian, but with white, which is even a tempo down. So the same happens with bishop d3. Stupid, very stupid move, but it's the same principle. Just when they take, you attack the bishop. You can also be faced with other moves, such as defending the pawn, such as d3 or f3. d3, you just take the pawn, and if they take, well, you just trade queens, and you have a slight edge because white can castle, and already at move 3, you're with the black pieces. If they do play f3, here you don't take, because then you can improve their center, but that just allows you to play e5. If they do take, you take, and they play knight. For example, you just play queen c5, prevent them from castling. Now your queen is good, because this pawn is really stifling the development on the knight and making the king weak. If, for example, just play d3, very solid, very stupid, but very solid. You just play bishop c5 and you have a very pleasant position. Finally, you can also be faced with the move c3, trying to play d4, but here I just advise you to take. They can, for example, play d4 and take en passant. Go check that out if you don't know what it is. But yeah, if they can try to take the pawn back, for example, with queen a4. But here I just advise you to do block check with a knight and play something like knight f6, e5, and you have more pieces out and very pleasant position. Finally, f4, which is the so-called Williams Gambit. We save the best, the worst, if you may, for last. If they play f4, well, just take the pawn. It's a free pawn. They can play knight f3, but this is the case of the Gambit where you can just defend the pawn. If they play bishop c4, play bishop f5. Just need to be careful not to get your bishop trapped with this, but this is rarely going to be the case. So this is one of those gambits that for white that's already on move 2. You're already with -2 for black, so nothing to worry. So this has been the third episode of the series facing declining variations. This episode we looked at the Scandinavian defense. I hope you like it. If you want to see more content of this, be sure to leave a comment down below, and subscribe and like. Again, if you want to see more of these, I'll leave the list in the description. And have a nice day.